The dust had barely settled on the departing wagon when Willa Crawford realized with a sickening lurch that her sister and brother-in-law were not coming back. The infant in her arms wailed louder, his tiny fists beating against her chest as the summer heat of 1878 bore down on them both like a physical weight. She stood alone on the rutted trail 5 miles outside Grass Valley, California, watching the wagon disappear into the shimmering distance, her traveling trunk sitting in the dirt beside her like a tombstone marking where her old life had ended. Her sister Margaret had promised her a fresh start in California, a chance to escape the shame that had followed Willa across 3 states after her husband died and left her with nothing but debts and whispered accusations. But Margaret's husband Joseph had grown colder with each passing mile, his resentment building until it exploded this morning in a fury of cruel words. The baby, Margaret and Joseph's own son, had been crying for hours, and when Willa could not soothe him, Joseph had called her useless, a burden they could not afford. Margaret had wept but said nothing as Joseph ordered Willa out of the wagon, shoving the screaming infant into her arms with the declaration that if she was so concerned about the child, she could care for him herself until they returned. But Willa had seen the truth in Margaret's eyes as the wagon pulled away. They were not coming back. The baby's cries grew more desperate, and Willa felt panic claw at her throat. She was 22 years old, widowed for a year, and now abandoned in the California wilderness with a 4-month-old infant who was not even her own. The July sun beat mercilessly overhead, and she had only the water in her canteen and whatever supplies were in her trunk. She tried rocking the baby, tried singing softly, but little Thomas only screamed louder, his face red and damp with sweat and tears. She did not know how long she stood there, swaying with the crying child, before she heard the steady rhythm of hoofbeats approaching from the direction of Grass Valley. Hope and fear warred in her chest as she turned to see a lone rider coming toward her, leading a pack horse behind him. As he drew closer, she could make out broad shoulders, a worn leather vest over a dark shirt, and a hat pulled low against the sun. He slowed his horse as he approached, and she saw his eyes take in the scene with quick intelligence, the crying baby, the trunk, her obvious distress. "Madam," he said, his voice a deep rumble as he brought his horse to a stop a respectful distance away. He touched the brim of his hat, and she saw a face weathered by sun and wind, probably somewhere in his mid-20s, with dark hair and eyes the color of creek water in shadow. "You in need of assistance?" Willa's throat felt thick with unshed tears, but she forced herself to speak clearly. "I was traveling with my sister and her husband. They left me here with their child. I do not think they are coming back." Something shifted in the cowboy's expression, a tightening around his eyes that might have been anger on her behalf. He dismounted in one smooth motion, approaching slowly as if she were a spooked horse. The baby's cries had not diminished, and she saw him wince slightly at the volume. "How long has the little one been crying?" he asked. "Hours," Willa admitted, her voice breaking slightly. "I cannot make him stop. He needs his mother and she is gone." The cowboy's jaw tightened, but his voice remained gentle. "May I?" He held out his arms, and Willa stared at him in confusion. "I have some experience with babies. My sister had 5 before she passed. Let me try." There was something in his steady gaze that made Willa trust him, or perhaps it was simply that she had no other choice. She carefully transferred the screaming infant into the cowboy's arms and watched in amazement as he cradled Thomas against his chest, one large hand supporting the baby's head while he began to walk in a slow, swaying circle, murmuring words too low for her to hear. "He is probably hungry," the cowboy said after a moment, still swaying. "How long since he ate?" "This morning," Willa said. "My sister was nursing him." The cowboy nodded, his expression grave. "That is a problem then. We need to get him to town, get some milk into him. There is a woman there, Mrs. Henderson, who has a dairy. She will know what to do." He looked at her directly, and she felt the full weight of his attention. "My name is Bennett Ashford. I work a small ranch about 2 miles outside Grass Valley. I will not leave you and this baby out here to suffer. Let me be your family until we can sort this out." The words hit Willa with unexpected force, bringing tears to her eyes that she blinked back furiously. "I am Willa Crawford," she managed. "I have a little money, not much, but I can pay you for your help." "I do not want your money," Bennett said firmly. The baby's cries had softened to whimpers against his chest. "What was done to you is wrong, and I will not compound that wrong by charging you for basic human decency." He glanced at her trunk. "Can you ride?" "Yes," Willa said. "I grew up on a farm in Missouri." "Good." Bennett shifted the baby carefully into one arm and reached for his horse's reins with the other. "We will put your trunk on the pack horse. You can ride my horse Copper here, and I will walk alongside with the little one. It is not far to town." Within minutes, Bennett had efficiently strapped her trunk to the pack horse and helped her mount his large bay gelding. He handed the baby back up to her, and she settled Thomas carefully in her arms as Bennett took Copper's reins and began leading them toward Grass Valley. The baby, exhausted from crying, finally began to quiet, his tiny fingers curling around the edge of Willa's sleeve as he made soft, distressed sounds. "You are good with him," Bennett observed, glancing up at her. "He trusts you." "I lived with my sister for the past 3 months," Willa said quietly. "I helped care for Thomas since he was born. I thought Margaret and I were close. I thought she loved me." The bitterness in her voice surprised her. "What they did was not about you," Bennett said, his voice hard. "It was about their own failings. A man who would abandon his own infant son with no provision for his care is no man at all." They walked in silence for a while, the only sounds the steady clip of hooves, the creak of leather, and the baby's occasional whimpers. The sun beat down relentlessly, and Willa felt sweat trickling down her spine beneath her traveling dress. She watched Bennett's broad back as he walked ahead of her, his stride even and unhurried despite the heat. There was something solid about him, something reliable that made her feel, for the first time in hours, that perhaps she would survive this day after all. "Why did you help me?" she asked finally. "You do not know me. For all you know, I am a terrible person who deserved to be abandoned." Bennett turned to look at her, and there was no judgment in his eyes, only a quiet sadness. "I know what it is to be left behind," he said simply. "My parents died of fever when I was 15. My sister was 12. We had relatives who could have taken us in, but they said we were too much of a burden. We made our own way, the two of us, until Clara married and had her own family." He paused, his throat working. "She died in childbirth 2 years ago. Her husband took the children and moved back east, said California held too many painful memories. I have not seen my nieces and nephews since." "I am sorry," Willa said softly, and meant it. She understood loss, understood the particular ache of family ties severed. "Life is hard enough without people making it harder for each other," Bennett said. "When I see someone in need, I help if I can. It is as simple as that." But Willa suspected it was not simple at all. There was a depth to Bennett Ashford that intrigued her, a quiet strength that spoke of hard lessons learned and survived. She found herself wanting to know more about this cowboy who had appeared like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to voice. The baby stirred against her, and she looked down to find Thomas's blue eyes open, staring up at her with that unfocused infant gaze. His lower lip trembled, and she knew the respite was temporary. He would be hungry again soon, and his cries would return. As if reading her thoughts, Bennett said, "We are almost there. See that rise ahead? Grass Valley is just beyond it." Sure enough, as they crested the low hill, Willa saw the town spread before them in the valley below. A collection of wooden buildings clustered along a main street, with houses and farms scattered on the outskirts. It was smaller than she had expected, but it looked prosperous, with several large buildings that might be stores or hotels, and a church steeple rising above the other structures. Bennett led them down the main street, past the curious stares of townspeople going about their afternoon business. Willa felt their eyes on her, assessing, judging, and she lifted her chin, refusing to show shame for circumstances beyond her control. Bennett seemed unconcerned by the attention, focused entirely on his destination. He stopped in front of a neat white house with a wide porch and flower boxes beneath the windows. A hand-painted sign near the gate read, "Henderson Dairy Fresh Milk Daily." Before Bennett could knock, the door opened, and a woman in her 40s emerged, wiping her hands on her apron. "Bennett Ashford, as I live and breathe," she said with a warm smile that faded as she took in the scene before her. "What trouble have you found now?" "The bad kind, Mrs. Henderson," Bennett said. He helped Willa dismount, and she felt his hand steady at her waist, strong and respectful. She took Thomas back into her arms as the baby began to fuss again. "This is Miss Crawford and young Thomas. The baby needs milk urgently, and I was hoping you might help, Mrs." Henderson's eyes sharpened, taking in every detail, the quality of Willa's dress despite the dust, the expensive trunk on the pack horse, the genuine distress in the baby's cries. "Bring them inside," she said immediately. "You too, Bennett, I want to hear the whole story." The interior of the house was cool and clean, with whitewashed walls and simple, sturdy furniture. Mrs. Henderson led them to the kitchen, where she immediately began preparing a bottle with fresh milk, adding a touch of sugar and warming it gently. "Tell me," she said as she worked, and Bennett laid out the facts in his straightforward way while Willa held the increasingly frantic baby. Mrs. Henderson's expression grew stormy as she listened, but her hands remained gentle as she took Thomas from Willa and settled into a rocking chair, offering him the bottle. The baby latched on immediately, sucking desperately, and the sudden silence was profound. "Those people should be horsewhipped," Mrs. Henderson said flatly. "Abandoning their own child. It is monstrous." She looked at Willa with kind eyes. "You did nothing wrong, dear. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise." The words, spoken with such certainty, broke something loose in Willa's chest, and she felt tears spill down her cheeks before she could stop them. Bennett moved closer, not touching her but offering his presence as comfort, and she found herself grateful for his steady silence. "What will you do?" Mrs. Henderson asked gently, still focused on feeding the baby. "I do not know," Willa admitted, wiping her eyes with shaking hands. "I have some money, enough for a room for a few weeks perhaps. I can sew and I can read and write. I will find work somehow." "But Thomas," her voice broke, "I cannot care for him properly. He needs his mother." "His mother abandoned him," Mrs. Henderson said bluntly. "You are the one who carried him to safety. That counts for something." She looked at Bennett. "What are you thinking? I can see your mind working." Bennett shifted his weight, and Willa saw him carefully considering his words. "I am thinking that Miss Crawford and the baby need a safe place to stay while we figure out the legalities. I am thinking my ranch has plenty of room, and I could use help with the household tasks I have been neglecting. I am thinking that if Miss Crawford were willing to work as my housekeeper, it would solve several problems at once." Willa stared at him. "You are offering me employment, a place to live." "I am offering you options," Bennett said carefully. "You can stay at the hotel in town if you prefer, but my ranch is quiet, private. You and the baby would have space and safety while you decide what comes next. The work is real. I am not offering charity. I have been living like a bachelor too long, and my house shows it. But you would have your own room, your autonomy, and time to think. People will talk, Mrs. Henderson said, though her tone suggested she was playing devil's advocate rather than objecting. People always talk, Bennett replied, but Miss Crawford's reputation will be safe. I will make sure of it. Willa looked between them, her mind spinning. The offer was generous, perhaps too generous, but she could see the sincerity in Bennett's eyes. And what other choice did she have? She could take a room in town, but her money would not last long, and finding respectable work while caring for an infant would be nearly impossible. "Why are you doing this?" she asked Bennett directly. "You do not know me. You have already helped far more than anyone could expect." Bennett met her gaze steadily. "Because you need help, and I can give it. Because that baby deserves a chance at a good life, and he will not get it if you are struggling to survive." "Because," he paused, something vulnerable flickering across his features, "because I know what it is to be alone in the world, and I would not wish that on anyone if I have the means to prevent it." Mrs. Henderson made a sound of approval. "Bennett Ashford, your mother would be proud of the man you have become." She stood, having finished feeding Thomas, and handed the now drowsy baby to Willa. "My advice, Miss Crawford, is to accept his offer. Bennett is one of the good ones, and they are rare as hen's teeth. You will be safe with him, and that baby needs stability. Take some time, get your bearings, and then decide what comes next." Willa looked down at Thomas, sleeping peacefully in her arms, his tiny face finally relaxed. She thought of the alternative, a small hotel room, her money dwindling, the constant worry and judgment. Then she looked at Bennett, at the patient waiting in his eyes, the quiet strength that had already proven itself reliable. "I accept," she said. "Thank you. I will work hard, I promise you that." "I do not doubt it," Bennett said, and his slow smile transformed his face, making him suddenly, devastatingly handsome. Willa felt her breath catch, then firmly reminded herself that this was a business arrangement, nothing more. She could not afford romantic foolishness. Not now, not with her life in such chaos. Mrs. Henderson provided them with several bottles of milk and instructions for feeding, along with clean cloths for diapers, and a knowing look that Willa chose to ignore. Bennett loaded everything onto the pack horse, then helped Willa mount Copper again, carefully handing Thomas up to her. The baby slept on, oblivious to the dramatic turns his young life had taken. The ride to Bennett's ranch took about 30 minutes, following a well-worn trail that wound through golden grassland dotted with oak trees. The property, when they reached it, was more impressive than Willa had expected. A sturdy 2-story house sat in a clearing, with a barn, corral, and several outbuildings arranged in neat order. She could see cattle grazing in the distance, and the whole place had an air of careful maintenance. "My father built the house," Bennett said as he helped her down from the horse. "He had plans to expand, run more cattle, but then he and my mother died, and Clara and I just tried to hold on to what we had. After Clara left, I have kept things going, but it is a lot for one person." The house's interior surprised Willa even more. The main room was spacious, with a large stone fireplace, comfortable furniture, and windows that let in generous light. A kitchen occupied one end, well equipped and organized, though she could see the signs of bachelor living in the dishes stacked by the basin and the dust on the shelves. A staircase led to the second floor. "There are 3 bedrooms upstairs," Bennett said, climbing the stairs with her trunk on his shoulder as if it weighed nothing. "You can have the one Clara used. It has the best light and it is the largest. I thought you would want space for the baby." The room he showed her was indeed lovely, with a large window overlooking the front yard, a solid bed with a simple quilt, a dresser, a wardrobe, and even a rocking chair in the corner. It was clean and welcoming, far nicer than anywhere Willa had lived in the past year. "Bennett, this is too much," she said, turning to face him. Thomas stirred in her arms but did not wake. "You have already done so much." "It is just a room that was sitting empty," Bennett said, setting her trunk at the foot of the bed. "And you will earn your keep, I assure you. I have been living on burned bacon and stale bread for months now. A proper meal would be worth a great deal to me." Despite everything, Willa found herself smiling. "I can promise you better than burned bacon." "Then we have a fair agreement," Bennett said. He moved to the door, then paused. "Miss Crawford, I want you to understand something. You are safe here. If you ever feel uncomfortable, if you ever want to leave, you need only say so. I will help you find other arrangements, no questions asked. You have my word on that." The sincerity in his voice, the respect implicit in his words, moved Willa deeply. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything. I will not forget this kindness." Bennett nodded, looking suddenly awkward, and retreated to the hallway. "I will be in the barn tending to the horses if you need anything. Take your time settling in." After he left, Willa carefully laid Thomas in the center of the large bed, surrounding him with pillows so he could not roll. The baby slept on, exhausted from his ordeal. She unpacked her trunk with shaking hands, hanging her few dresses in the wardrobe, arranging her brushes and meager possessions on the dresser. When she caught sight of herself in the small mirror above the dresser, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Dust-stained, red-eyed, hair falling from its pins, she looked like she had been through a war. In a way, she supposed she had. She poured water from the pitcher into the basin and washed her face and hands, the cool water reviving her somewhat. Then she sat in the rocking chair and allowed herself, finally, to fully feel the enormity of what had happened. Margaret's betrayal cut deeper than anything, because it had been so complete. Her own sister, who had promised refuge, who had begged Willa to come west with them, had abandoned her without a backward glance. And little Thomas, innocent Thomas, had been cast aside by his own mother as if he were excess baggage rather than a precious life. The anger came then, hot and fierce, burning away the shock and hurt. How dare they? How dare Margaret and Joseph leave a baby to die in the wilderness because he was inconvenient, because he cried too much, because they were selfish and cruel? Willa had seen the change in them during the journey west, had watched them grow bitter and harsh, but she had never imagined they would sink to such depths. A soft knock on the doorframe made her look up. Bennett stood in the hallway, his expression cautious. "I am sorry to disturb you. I thought you might want some coffee. I just made a fresh pot." "Yes," Willa said, standing. "Thank you. And Bennett, you do not need to knock. This is your house." "It is your room," Bennett said simply. "Your privacy deserves respect." They went downstairs together, and Willa settled at the kitchen table while Bennett poured coffee into 2 sturdy mugs. He sat across from her, and they drank in companionable silence for a moment. "What will happen with Thomas?" Willa asked finally. "Legally, I mean. He is not my child." Bennett's expression grew thoughtful. "That is complicated. His parents abandoned him, which is a crime. If they do not return, if they cannot be located, he would become a ward of the county. He would likely be sent to an orphanage or given to another family to raise." "No," Willa said fiercely, surprising herself with her vehemence. "I will not let him go to an orphanage. I will care for him myself." "That is admirable," Bennett said gently, "but the law may not give you a choice. You are not his legal guardian." "Then I will become his legal guardian," Willa said. "There must be a way. What if Margaret and Joseph do not come back? What if they have truly abandoned him? Someone needs to speak for Thomas to protect his interests. You would take on that responsibility?" Bennett asked, studying her intently. "Raising a child alone is not easy." "I would not be alone," Willa said, then stopped, feeling her cheeks heat. "I mean, I am here with you for now at least, and Mrs. Henderson seems kind. Surely there are others in town who would help." Bennett's eyes softened. "You are right. You would not be alone. I will help you however I can. But we should speak to the sheriff, let him know what happened. And we should probably talk to a lawyer about your options regarding Thomas." The practicality of his words grounded Willa, reminding her that good intentions were not enough. She would need to be smart, strategic, if she wanted to keep Thomas safe. "Will you come with me?" "To town, I mean, to speak with the authorities." "Of course," Bennett said immediately. "We will go tomorrow. For now, you should rest. It has been a difficult day." Rest seemed impossible with so many worries crowding her mind, but Willa found herself nodding. "I should prepare dinner. It is the least I can do." "You do not have to," Bennett said, but she could see the hope in his eyes. "I want to," Willa said firmly. "It will give me something to focus on besides worry. Do you have supplies?" Bennett showed her the pantry and the cold cellar, both surprisingly well stocked. She found flour, eggs, potatoes, onions, cured ham, and various other staples. Within an hour, she had a hearty meal cooking, filling the house with savory aromas that made her realize how hungry she was. They ate together at the kitchen table as the sun began to set, casting golden light through the windows. Bennett praised her cooking with genuine enthusiasm, and Willa felt a small glow of pride. It was such a simple thing, preparing a meal, but it felt like reclaiming some small piece of normalcy. "Tell me about the ranch," Willa said as they ate. "How did you manage it alone?" Bennett talked about his work, the cattle he raised, the hay he grew, the challenges of running a ranch single-handedly. He spoke with quiet passion about the land, the satisfaction of hard work, the pleasure of watching calves grow strong. Willa found herself fascinated, not just by what he said, but by the way he said it, the competence and care evident in every word. "You like it?" she asked. "The ranch life?" "I do," Bennett said. "It is not easy, but it is honest work. You can see the results of your labor. There is something satisfying about that." He paused, looking at her curiously. "What about you? What did you do before you came west?" Willa hesitated, old shame rising. "I was married," she said carefully. "My husband was a clerk in a law office in Missouri. When he died, I discovered he had debts I knew nothing about. The creditors took everything. I was left with nothing, and people assumed I must have known about his dealings, must have been complicit somehow. The whispers followed me everywhere. That is why I agreed to come west with Margaret. I thought it was a chance to start over." "And instead you found more hardship," Bennett said, his voice gentle. "I am sorry. You have been dealt an unfair hand." "Perhaps," Willa said, "but I am still in the game. I am not giving up." Bennett's smile was warm and approving. "I am glad to hear it. You are stronger than you know, Miss Crawford." The compliment, spoken with such sincerity, made Willa's heart flutter in a way she firmly told herself was inappropriate. Bennett was her employer, her benefactor. She could not afford to develop romantic feelings for him, no matter how kind he was, no matter how the lamplight made his eyes glow like honey. After dinner, Willa checked on Thomas, who was beginning to stir. She fed him one of the bottles Mrs. Henderson had prepared, and this time he ate contentedly, his small hands wrapping around her fingers as he drank. She changed him using the cloths Mrs. Henderson had provided, marveling at how tiny he was, how vulnerable. The fierce protectiveness she felt surprised her. This baby was not hers by blood, but he was hers by circumstance, by choice. She would fight for him. That night, Willa lay in her new bed with Thomas sleeping in a nest of blankets beside her on the floor in a drawer she had repurposed as a temporary cradle. Through the open window, she could hear crickets chirping, the distant lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind through grass. It was so different from the cities she had known, so peaceful and yet so foreign. She thought about Bennett, sleeping somewhere in this house, and felt a complicated tangle of gratitude, curiosity, and something else she was not ready to name. She had been abandoned, betrayed, left for dead, essentially. But somehow, through the intervention of a kind stranger, she had been given a second chance. What she made of that chance was up to her. Morning came early on the ranch, announced by a rooster crowing somewhere outside. Willa woke to find Thomas already awake and whimpering, his face scrunched in displeasure. She fed him, changed him, and dressed quickly in one of her simpler dresses, pinning her hair up in a practical style. When she carried Thomas downstairs, she found Bennett already in the kitchen, cooking eggs and bacon. "Good morning," he said, looking up with a smile. "How did you sleep?" "Better than expected," Willa admitted. "How can I help?" They worked together preparing breakfast, and Willa found the domesticity of it oddly comforting. Bennett was easy to be around, his presence solid and reassuring without being overwhelming. He made silly faces at Thomas, drawing gurgles of delight from the baby, and Willa found herself smiling at the sight. After breakfast, they prepared for the trip to town. Bennett hitched up a small wagon, explaining that it would be more comfortable for her and the baby than riding. The drive took about 40 minutes, and they spent the time talking, sharing stories about their pasts. Bennett told her about growing up on the ranch, about his sister Clara, and their struggles after their parents died. Willa told him about her childhood on the Missouri farm, about her brief marriage and its disastrous end. "Did you love him?" Bennett asked quietly. "Your husband?" Willa considered the question carefully. "I thought I did. But looking back, I think I loved the idea of him, the security he represented. I was young and foolish. I did not see who he really was until it was too late." "That is not foolishness," Bennett said. "That is just being human. We all make mistakes in judgment." "Have you ever been married?" Willa asked, then flushed. "I am sorry, that is too personal." "No, it is all right," Bennett said. "I have never been married. I was engaged once a few years ago to a woman from town. But she wanted to move to San Francisco, wanted city life. I could not leave the ranch and she would not stay. So we ended it." "Do you regret it?" Willa asked softly. "Sometimes," Bennett admitted, "but not as often as I once did. I think we wanted different things from life. It would not have worked long term." He glanced at her, his expression open. "I think when you find the right person, you do not have to choose between them and the life you want. You build a life together that works for both of you." The words resonated with Willa deeply, touching on hopes she had thought buried. But she pushed the feeling aside, focusing instead on the approaching town and the challenges ahead. Their first stop was the sheriff's office. Sheriff Tom Brewster was a lean man in his 50s with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He listened to their story with growing anger, his mouth tightening into a hard line. "This is a serious matter," he said when they finished. "Abandonment of a child is a criminal offense. Do you know where your sister and her husband were headed?" "They said Sacramento," Willa said. "But I do not know if that was true." "I will send telegrams to the sheriffs in surrounding counties, see if we can track them down," Brewster said. "In the meantime, the baby is in your care, Miss Crawford. I would say that is the best place for him. Better you than an orphanage." "But what are her legal rights?" Bennett asked. "If the parents do not return, can Miss Crawford petition for guardianship?" "That is a question for a lawyer," Brewster said. "I would suggest talking to Daniel Morris. He handles these kinds of cases." They found Daniel Morris in a small office above the general store. He was a young man, probably not much older than Bennett, with intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He listened to their story with careful attention, taking notes. "This is unusual," he said finally, "but not impossible. If the parents have truly abandoned the child, and if they cannot be located or refuse to claim him, you could petition the court for guardianship. You would need to demonstrate that you can provide for the child, that you are of good moral character, and that it is in the child's best interest to remain in your care." "How long would that take?" Willa asked. "Several months at least," Morris said, "and there are no guarantees. The court would want to be certain the parents have been given every opportunity to reclaim their child before terminating their rights." "And in the meantime?" Bennett asked. "In the meantime, the current arrangement stands. Miss Crawford cares for the baby, and the sheriff looks for the parents. If they return and want the child back, they have that right, unless we can prove they are unfit." It was not the concrete answer Willa had hoped for, but it was something. They thanked Morris and left, stepping out into the bright morning. "It will be all right," Bennett said, seeing her worried expression. "We will take it one day at a time." "You keep saying we," Willa said, looking up at him, "but this is not your burden to bear." "Perhaps I want to bear it," Bennett said simply. "You and Thomas are not burdens. You are people who need help, and I can help. It is not more complicated than that." But Willa suspected it was more complicated, or could become so. She saw the way Bennett looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not watching, the softness in his eyes, the careful respect of his manner. And she knew her own feelings were growing beyond simple gratitude. Every day she spent in his company, every small kindness he showed, every moment of his steady strength, drew her closer to danger. Because she could not afford to love Bennett Ashford, no matter how easy it would be. She had nothing to offer him but trouble and complications. Over the following weeks, a routine developed at the ranch. Willa woke early to tend to Thomas, then prepared breakfast for herself and Bennett. While Bennett worked outside with the cattle and the land, Willa threw herself into managing the household. She cleaned the accumulated dust and disorder, organized the pantry, mended clothes that had gone too long unrepaired. She cooked hearty meals and learned to bake bread in the temperamental wood stove. And through it all, she cared for Thomas, who was thriving under her attention, growing plumper and more alert each day. The work was hard but satisfying. For the first time in over a year, Willa felt useful, felt that her presence mattered. Bennett never took her contributions for granted, always thanking her for meals, for the clean house, for the small comforts she provided. And slowly, cautiously, they grew closer. They talked over dinner, long conversations that ranged from philosophy to foolishness. Bennett had a dry sense of humor that surprised her, and she discovered she could make him laugh with her observations about ranch life. When Thomas was fussy in the evenings, Bennett would take him, walking in slow circles around the main room while humming old ballads, and Willa would watch them together, feeling her heart constrict with emotions she could not quite name. In early August, Sheriff Brewster came to the ranch with news. He had located Margaret and Joseph in Sacramento. They were living in a boarding house and working menial jobs, barely scraping by. When confronted about abandoning their child, Joseph had claimed they had left Willa and the baby with friends near Grass Valley, that it was supposed to be temporary. Margaret had broken down crying but had not contradicted her husband's lies. "I told them they need to either come back and claim their child or relinquish their parental rights," Brewster said. "I gave them 2 weeks to decide. They will send word through me." The news cast a pall over the household. Willa found herself sick with anxiety, terrified that Margaret would decide to take Thomas back, to reclaim the baby she had so callously abandoned. The idea of handing Thomas over to people who had proven themselves unworthy parents was unbearable. What if they want him back? She asked Bennett late one night. They were sitting on the front porch, watching the stars emerge as Thomas slept inside. "What if I have to give him up?" "Then we will fight it," Bennett said firmly. "We will show the court what they did, prove they are unfit." "You are a better mother to that baby than your sister ever was." "I am not his mother," Willa said, her voice breaking. "I have no legal claim to him." "You have something more important than a legal claim," Bennett said, turning to face her. "You have love. You have commitment. You have been the one who stayed when everyone else left. That counts for something." "Does it?" Willa whispered. "In the eyes of the law, in the eyes of anyone with sense," Bennett said. "And in my eyes, absolutely." Willa looked at him, at the sincerity blazing in his face, and felt something shift inside her. She was falling for him, had been falling for weeks, and there was no stopping it now. This good, decent man who had saved her, who had offered her sanctuary without asking anything in return, who looked at her like she mattered, like she was worth something. How could she not love him? "Bennett," she started, then stopped, unsure what she wanted to say. He stood abruptly, shoving his hands in his pockets. "I should check on the stock before bed. I will see you in the morning." He was gone before she could respond, and Willa sat alone in the darkness, wondering if she had imagined the tension between them or if he felt it too. The answer came 2 nights later. Willa was washing dishes after dinner when she felt Bennett's presence behind her. She turned to find him standing close, his expression unreadable. "Willa," he said, using her first name for the first time, "I need to tell you something." Her heart hammered. "What is it?" "These past weeks, having you here, it has changed everything. I thought I was fine alone, thought I had accepted it. But now I know what I was missing. You have brought life back to this house, to me. And I know the timing is terrible. I know you have enough to worry about without me complicating things, but I cannot keep pretending I do not feel what I feel." "What do you feel?" Willa asked, barely breathing. "I am falling in love with you," Bennett said simply. "Maybe I have been since that first day I found you on the road. You are brave and kind and stronger than anyone I have ever met. And if I have any chance at all, if you feel even a fraction of what I feel, I want to know. Because I want a life with you, Willa. I want to be a family, you and me and Thomas. I want to give you the home and the security you deserve. I want to wake up every morning knowing you are here. I want to grow old with you." Tears streamed down Willa's face, but for the first time in so long they were happy tears. "I feel it too," she whispered. "I have been trying not to, trying to be sensible, but Bennett, I love you. I think I have loved you since you took Thomas in your arms and offered to be our family." His smile was incandescent, lighting up his whole face. He reached out, cupping her face gently with his calloused hands. "May I kiss you, please?" she breathed, and then his lips were on hers, gentle and reverent. The kiss was everything a first kiss should be, sweet and promising and full of hope. When they pulled apart, Bennett rested his forehead against hers. "We will face whatever comes together," he said. "No matter what your sister decides, no matter what the law says, we are a family now, the 3 of us. Nothing will change that." Willa believed him. For the first time in so long, she believed in the future, in the possibility of happiness. The 2 weeks passed in a haze of anxious waiting and tentative joy. Bennett courted Willa properly, taking her on evening walks, bringing her wildflowers, holding her hand as they watched Thomas play on a blanket in the grass. They talked for hours, planning a future together, discussing everything from how many children they wanted to where they would expand the house. Bennett proposed formally one evening, getting down on one knee and offering her a simple gold ring that had belonged to his mother. Willa said yes through happy tears, When Sheriff Brewster finally returned, they faced him together, hands clasped. His expression was grave as he sat in their parlor. "I heard from your sister and her husband," he said. "They have decided to relinquish their parental rights to Thomas." Joseph signed a document stating they cannot provide for the child and consent to him being adopted by someone who can. Your sister signed as well, though I am told she wept while doing it. Relief and grief warred in Willa's chest. Relief that Thomas would stay with her, grief for the sister she had lost, for Margaret's failure as a mother. "What happens now? You petition the court for formal adoption," Brewster said. "With the parents' consent and my recommendation, it should go through without issue. The judge will want to ensure the child is being properly cared for, but from what I can see, he is thriving." He looked at Bennett. "I heard you two are engaged. That will help your case. A married couple adopting a child is more favorable in the eyes of the law." After Brewster left, Willa held Thomas close, breathing in his sweet baby smell. "You are ours," she whispered. "Really, truly ours. Nobody can take you away now." Bennett wrapped his arms around both of them. "Our son," he said wonderingly. "We are going to be a family." They married in September. A small ceremony at the church in Grass Valley with Mrs. Henderson and Sheriff Brewster as witnesses. Willa wore a simple blue dress, and Bennett wore his best suit, and Thomas, now 6 months old and babbling happily, was passed between well-wishers throughout the celebration. The adoption was finalized a month later, with Thomas officially becoming Thomas Crawford Ashford. Willa thought it was important to keep her family name, even after Margaret's betrayal, because Thomas deserved to know where he came from. That winter was the happiest of Willa's life. She reveled in her roles as wife and mother, in the warmth of Bennett's love, in the steady routine of ranch life. Bennett taught her to ride properly, and on crisp winter mornings, they would ride together across the ranch, checking on cattle, surveying their land. Thomas grew strong and healthy, learning to sit up and then to crawl, filling the house with squeals of delight. Bennett was a natural father, patient and playful and devoted. He built Thomas a cradle with his own hands, carved wooden toys, spent hours rolling a ball back and forth across the floor with his son. Watching them together filled Willa with such joy she sometimes felt her heart might burst. Their physical intimacy, when it developed after their wedding, was a revelation to Willa. Her first marriage had been dutiful and joyless, but with Bennett, everything was different. He was tender and passionate, attentive to her needs, making her feel cherished and desired. They grew to know each other's bodies with the same thoroughness they had learned each other's minds and hearts. Spring brought new calves and new challenges. A late frost threatened their kitchen garden, and they worked together to protect the tender plants. Thomas celebrated his first birthday with a cake Willa baked and a wooden horse Bennett carved. The baby's delight in his gifts, his laughter as Bennett bounced him on the toy horse, was a memory Willa knew she would treasure forever. In early summer, Willa realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with complicated emotions, joy at the prospect of giving Bennett a child of his own blood, but also fierce protectiveness toward Thomas, not wanting him to feel supplanted. When she told Bennett the news, he immediately pulled her into his arms. "Another child," he breathed. "Willa, you have given me everything I never dared hope for. You do not mind that Thomas will not be our only child?" she asked. Bennett pulled back to look at her seriously. "Thomas is our child, fully and completely. This baby will be his brother or sister, no different, no more or less loved. Do you understand? We are a family, all of us." The certainty in his voice soothed her worries. They told Thomas, though at 15 months he did not understand, that he was going to be a big brother. He patted Willa's belly and said, "Baby." one of his handful of words, and they both laughed at his delight. The pregnancy was easier than Willa had feared, though she tired more quickly, and Bennett became fiercely protective, insisting she rest often. Thomas, sensing something was different, became clingy, and Willa spent long afternoons rocking him, singing lullabies, assuring him through word and touch that he was loved. In February of 1880, on a cold night with stars bright overhead, Willa gave birth to a son. Bennett was with her throughout, holding her hand, supporting her through the pain. When the baby finally arrived, squalling and red-faced, Bennett cut the cord with shaking hands and laid the infant on Willa's chest with tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," Bennett whispered. "You are perfect. I love you so much." They named him William Bennett Ashford, and Thomas, now nearly 2, was fascinated by his tiny brother, wanting to touch him constantly, to help with everything. Willa watched her 2 sons together and felt her family, once so broken and uncertain, had been made whole. Life settled into a new rhythm with 2 children. The days were full and exhausting, but also rich with meaning. Bennett expanded his herd and the ranch prospered. They hired help during busy seasons, but mostly they managed together, partners in every sense of the word. Willa learned to be an expert ranch wife, helping with branding, tending the garden, preserving food for winter, managing accounts. Bennett supported her in everything, valuing her opinions, treating her as an equal. Thomas grew into a sturdy, serious boy with his father's steady demeanor and his mother's quick mind. He adored his brother William, who was sunny and mischievous and kept them all on their toes. Watching her sons play together, Willa sometimes thought of Margaret, wondering where she was, if she ever thought of the child she had abandoned. She felt mostly pity now, with only traces of old anger. Margaret had lost so much through her own choices, while Willa had gained everything. In the spring of 1882, Mrs. Henderson came to visit and found Willa hanging laundry while both boys played nearby. They sat together sharing coffee while the children chased chickens. "You look happy," Mrs. Henderson observed. "Truly happy." "I am," Willa said simply. "I never thought I could be after everything that happened. But Bennett and the boys, they have given me a life I could not have imagined." "You gave yourself that life," Mrs. Henderson said firmly. "You could have crumbled when your sister abandoned you, but you did not. You fought for yourself and that baby. You built this happiness through your own strength." The words resonated with Willa. She had been so focused on Bennett's role in her rescue that she had not fully acknowledged her own part. She had chosen to survive, chosen to love, chosen to build a family from the ruins of betrayal. That was her achievement as much as anyone's. That summer, a letter arrived addressed to Willa Crawford Ashford. The handwriting was familiar, and Willa's hands shook as she opened it. It was from Margaret. The letter was full of apologies and excuses, explaining how Joseph had become cruel, how she had been too weak to stand up to him, how she had regretted abandoning Thomas every day since. She wrote that she had left Joseph finally, that she was living with distant cousins in Oregon, working as a seamstress. She asked for forgiveness and for news of Thomas, but made no request to see him. Willa read the letter 3 times, feeling anger, pity, and a strange sort of closure. She showed it to Bennett that evening. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I want to write back," Willa said slowly. "I want to tell her that Thomas is well, that he is loved and thriving. I want to forgive her, not for her sake, but for mine. I do not want to carry that anger anymore." "Then that is what you should do," Bennett said, kissing her forehead. Willa's response was carefully worded. She told Margaret that Thomas, now 4 years old, was happy and healthy, that he was loved by his parents and his brother. She described the ranch and their life, wanting Margaret to know that Thomas had everything he needed. She said she forgave her, though she could never forget, and wished her well in her new life. She did not invite contact, did not suggest visits. Some bridges, once burned, could not be rebuilt. Margaret's response, when it came months later, was brief but grateful. She thanked Willa for her kindness and said she understood the boundaries. There was peace in that exchange, a final closing of an old wound. The years passed with the steady rhythm of ranch life. Thomas and William grew like weeds, loud and energetic and endlessly curious. In 1884, Willa gave birth to a daughter, Sarah Rose, who had her mother's dark eyes and her father's gentle temperament. The boys doted on their sister, Thomas especially, who took his role as oldest brother seriously. Bennett and Willa's love deepened with time, tested and strengthened by the challenges they faced together. Droughts, harsh winters, cattle disease, they weathered it all as a team. They laughed together, worked together, raised their children together. In quiet moments, usually at night after the children were asleep, they would sit on the porch swing Bennett had built, holding hands and watching the stars, and Willa would think how strange and wonderful life was, how the worst day of her life had led to the best. Thomas learned the truth of his origins when he was 8 years old. Willa and Bennett sat him down together, wanting him to hear it from them rather than from town gossip. They explained carefully about Margaret and Joseph, about the abandonment, about the adoption. Thomas listened with wide eyes, then asked the only question that mattered to him. "So you chose me. You chose to be my parents. Every single day," Bennett said, pulling his son into a tight embrace. "From the moment we met you, we chose you. You are ours, completely, forever." Thomas seemed satisfied with that. As he grew older, he showed no interest in contacting Margaret, though they told him the option was available if he ever changed his mind. He was a Crawford and an Ashford, part of the family they had built together, and that was enough. By 1890, the ranch had expanded significantly. They ran a large herd, employed several hands, and had built additional structures and a larger house to accommodate their growing family. Thomas was 14, William 12, and Sarah 6. Thomas was already working the ranch alongside his father, showing a natural aptitude for cattle and the land. William was more interested in books, talking about becoming a lawyer or teacher. Sarah was fearless and funny, as comfortable on horseback as in the kitchen. Willa looked at her children, at her thriving home, at her husband whose face still made her heart flutter after all these years, and felt a contentment so deep, it was almost painful. They had started with nothing, with worse than nothing, abandoned and desperate on a dusty trail. But through determination, love, and no small amount of luck, they had built a life of meaning and joy. Bennett found her one evening standing on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "That day on the trail," Willa said softly. "When Margaret and Joseph left me with Thomas, I thought my life was over. I thought I would die out there. But instead it was beginning," Bennett said. "Because of you," Willa said, turning in his arms to face him. "Because you heard a baby crying and decided to stop. Because you offered to be our family when we had no one." "We saved each other," Bennett corrected gently. "I was just existing before you came, going through the motions. You gave me purpose, love, a reason to build something beyond just survival. You and Thomas, and then William and Sarah, you made me whole." Willa reached up to touch his face, this man she loved so completely. "I would do it all again," she said. "Every hardship, every moment of fear and uncertainty. I would endure it all again to end up right here with you." "Me too," Bennett said, and kissed her with the tenderness of long familiarity and the passion that had never dimmed. As the years continued to unfold, their family remained the center of their world. Thomas married at 22, bringing home a sweet-natured young woman named Emma who fit into their family as if she had always been there. They gave Bennett and Willa their first grandchild, a boy named James, and watching Thomas with his son, Willa saw the cycle of love continuing, generation to generation. William did become a lawyer, studying in San Francisco but returning to Grass Valley to practice, saying he could never truly leave the land he loved. He married later, at 28, to a school teacher named Alice who challenged him intellectually and made him laugh. Sarah grew into a beautiful, spirited young woman who scandalized the town by insisting she wanted to help run the ranch rather than settle into domestic life. Bennett supported her completely, teaching her everything he knew, and she proved herself more than capable. She eventually married one of their ranch hands, a good man named Michael who loved her fierce independence. In 1900, on their 20th wedding anniversary, Bennett took Willa to San Francisco for a week, their first real trip away from the ranch. They stayed in a fancy hotel, ate in fine restaurants, saw plays and concerts. It was wonderful, but what Willa remembered most was not the city's splendors, but the quiet moments in their room, Bennett holding her close, telling her she was still the most beautiful woman he had ever seen, that he fell in love with her more each day. They returned to the ranch eager to see their children and grandchildren, to resume the life they had built. That life continued to expand and evolve, bringing new joys and occasional sorrows, as all lives do. They lost Mrs. Henderson in 1902, and Willa wept for the woman who had been one of her first friends in Grass Valley, who had helped her in those desperate early days. Bennett's health suffered a setback in 1905, a bad fall that left him with a limp, but he recovered and continued working the ranch with Thomas's increasing help. By 1910, they had 5 grandchildren and a 6th on the way. The ranch house was often full of noise and laughter, children running through the halls, family dinners that required multiple tables. Willa cooked for crowds, told stories, mediated disputes, and gloried in the beautiful chaos of it all. On a quiet evening in late autumn, with the first frost silvering the grass, Willa and Bennett sat on their porch swing as they had done countless times before. They were in their 50s now, weathered by time and hard work, but still strong, still devoted to each other and the life they had built. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had not ridden down that trail that day?" Bennett asked suddenly. "Never," Willa said firmly. "Because you did ride down that trail. You did stop to help. That is who you are, Bennett Ashford. That is why I love you." 32 years, Bennett marveled. 32 years since I found you and Thomas. It seems like yesterday and like forever all at once. "The best years of my life," Willa said, leaning into his warmth. "Every single one of them." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch settling for the night. Inside the house, they could hear Thomas and Emma putting their children to bed, the soft murmur of voices, a child's giggle quickly shushed. "We did well," Bennett said softly. "With Thomas, with all of it, we built something good." "We did," Willa agreed. "We built a family, we built a home, we built a life worth living." Thomas joined them on the porch a few minutes later, his oldest son perched on his shoulders. At 32, Thomas had Bennett's solid build and steady presence, but there was something of Willa in his eyes, in his gentle humor. "The little ones are finally asleep," Thomas said, lifting James down and settling beside his parents. "They wanted a story about the old days." "I told them about how you two met." "And what did you tell them?" Willa asked, smiling. "The truth," Thomas said simply. That sometimes families are not just about blood, but about choice and love. That you chose me, chose us, and that choice made all the difference. He looked at his parents with open affection. I am grateful every day for what you did, for what you gave me. I hope I have honored that by being a good father to my own children. You have exceeded every hope we ever had for you, Bennett said, his voice thick with emotion. You are a fine man, Thomas. Your mother and I are proud beyond words. After Thomas went back inside, Willa and Bennett remained on the porch, reluctant to end the perfect evening. The moon rose, full and bright, casting silver light across the ranch. I love you, Willa said, as she had said thousands of times before and would say thousands more. I love you, Bennett replied, as he always did, with the same sincerity as the first time. Today, tomorrow, forever. The years that followed were full and rich, marked by the milestones of their growing family. More grandchildren arrived, and then great-grandchildren, and the ranch passed gradually from Bennett and Thomas's hands to the next generation. Willa and Bennett grew older gracefully, still devoted to each other, still actively involved in the life of the ranch and their family. In 1920, on their 40th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered for a massive celebration. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren filled the ranch house and spilled out into the yard. There was music and dancing and a feast that took days to prepare. During the festivities, Thomas stood to make a toast. 40 years ago, my parents took a chance on each other, he said, his voice carrying over the crowd. They built this ranch, this family, on a foundation of love and determination. They taught us that family is not just who you are born to, but who chooses to stand by you. They taught us to work hard, to love deeply, and to never give up hope, even in the darkest times. I hope all of us carry those lessons forward, honoring the legacy they have created. The toast was met with cheers and applause, and Willa, sitting beside Bennett with his hand clasped in hers, felt tears of joy streaming down her face. This was her legacy, this beautiful, complicated, loving family. They had started with nothing, with an abandoned baby and a kind stranger, and had built something magnificent. As the party continued around them, Bennett leaned close and whispered, "Any regrets?" Willa looked at him, at his beloved face, at the life they had shared, and smiled. "Not a single one. You said let me be your family, and you kept that promise every day for 40 years. How could I regret even a moment?" "Another 40?" Bennett asked, his eyes twinkling. "At least," Willa promised. They did not get another 40 years, as mortality eventually claims everyone, but they got another 8, and those years were as filled with love as all the ones before. Bennett died peacefully in his sleep in 1928, with Willa beside him, holding his hand. His last words were, "I love you and I will wait for you." Willa mourned him deeply, but found comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the life they had built together. She lived another 6 years, dying quietly in 1934 at the age of 78, surrounded by family. Thomas held her hand as she passed, and her last words echoed Bennett's, "Tell your father I am coming home." They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, beneath 2 oak trees that had been saplings when they first married. Their graves were simple, marked with stones that read Bennett Ashford, 1853–1928, beloved husband, father, grandfather Willa Crawford Ashford, 1856–1934, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, but their true monument was not stone and earth. It was the thriving ranch that continued to flourish under Thomas and his descendants. It was the family that gathered each year to celebrate and remember. It was the story passed down through generations, of how a woman abandoned with a crying infant was saved by a cowboy who heard and said, "Let me be your family." and how that simple act of kindness had rippled forward, creating generations of love and connection. Thomas lived to be 84, passing the ranch to his own children and watching it grow and prosper. He often told the story of his adoption, of how his parents' love had saved him and created the foundation for everything that came after. He made sure every child in the family knew the story, understood that love and choice mattered more than blood, that family was what you made it. The ranch remained in the family for generations, a testament to Bennett and Willa's hard work and vision. The house was expanded and modernized, but the original structure remained, lovingly preserved. The porch swing where Bennett and Willa had spent so many evenings was kept and maintained, a reminder of their enduring love. Descendants of Bennett and Willa spread across California and beyond, but many returned regularly to the ranch, to the land that represented their roots and their family's history. They came to remember, to connect, to pass the stories to the next generation. And always, the central story was the same. That love transforms everything, that kindness matters, that families are built not just through birth, but through choice and commitment. The tale of how Bennett found Willa and Thomas on that dusty trail in 1878 became family legend, embellished and retold, but always returning to the essential truth at its core. A woman had been abandoned in her darkest hour, and a good man had chosen to help. From that single act of compassion had sprung an entire legacy, a family tree that spread wide and deep, rooted in love. And so, the story that began with a crying infant and a cowboy's promise of family lived on, generation after generation. A reminder that the choices we make in moments of crisis define not just our own lives, but the lives of all who come after. Bennett and Willa's descendants carried forward their legacy of love, of choosing family, of building something beautiful from the ruins of hardship. The ranch still stands today, though the land has changed and the buildings have evolved. But if you visit on a quiet evening, local legend says you can sometimes see two figures on the old porch swing, holding hands and watching the sunset, their love enduring even beyond death. Whether that is truth or romantic fancy hardly matters. What matters is that their story, their love, their family, continues. What matters is that in 1878, on a dusty California trail, two strangers became a family, and that family grew into something magnificent. Thomas's children and their children and all who came after carried forward the values Bennett and Willa had instilled: hard work, compassion, loyalty, and above all, love. They built their own lives, made their own choices, but always with the foundation their ancestors had laid. The story of Willa and Bennett became more than just family history. It became inspiration, a touchstone during difficult times, a reminder that even in our darkest moments, salvation can come from unexpected places. That a crying infant and a kind stranger can become the beginning of everything beautiful. That's saying, "Let me be your family," and meaning it can change the world, at least for those within the circle of that love. And in the end, that is all anyone can hope for: to love and be loved, to build something that lasts beyond themselves, to make the world a little better, a little kinder, through their presence in it. Bennett and Willa Ashford did that. They took their second chances and made something extraordinary. They proved that families are not just born, but made, through daily choice and constant love. They showed that the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best if we have the courage to accept help, to take risks, to choose love even when we have every reason to close our hearts. Their story is a love story, yes, but it is more than that. It is a story about resilience, about the power of kindness, about how we can save each other if we are willing to try. It is a story that deserves to be told and remembered, passed down through the generations as a reminder of what is possible when we choose love over fear, connection over isolation, hope over despair. Bennett heard a crying infant and said, "Let me be your family." Willa accepted, and together they built a life that mattered, a love that endured, a legacy that continued long after they were gone. And that, in the end, is the greatest success any of us can achieve. To love well, to be loved in return, and to leave the world better than we found it, one small act of kindness at a time.